Get tickets at whitpointlive.com.
It's these unexpected events that aren't inherently good or bad. They are meant to get us on the right path.
This is synchronicity.
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 Welcome to episode 98 of... Wait, is it 98? Hold on. Hold the frickin' phone. Hold on. Is it number episode 98? I don't know. I gotta look inside. Nope, 99. Welcome to episode 99 of Synchronicity. My guest this week is Adam Sommer, and we're talking about the eclipse that is happening today if you're listening when this is released, and it just happened if you're listening to it after it's released. And if you're listening to it before it's released, that's weird. Get out of my house or stop tapping my devices. Not cool. But welcome to this week's episode. It's a little bit early. That's how we're doing things. You know, I decided I got a lot going on. Let's jam one more thing on my plate to just totally make me lose my mind. I kid, of course. I'm super happy to be releasing this one early. I wanted to get an eclipse episode out because it's a fascinating thing. How do you not think about the eclipse? Even if the clickbait, nonsense, faux scientific, faux spiritualistic, don't know what that means, websites try to get you to click stuff about the eclipse, it's still a primordially fascinating event whether it's a partial or a total, depending on where you are, it blots out the sun. The moon blots out the sun for a little bit. They cross directly in front of each other, thereby changing our world just for a little bit from day to night. That's super fucking cool. So it obviously has an effect on everyone's psychology and psyche, whether they recognize it or not. If we believe in any type of epigenetic stuff, or just that this stuff does get passed down through humans and the collective unconscious, you can imagine that we still have some type of reaction to something as profound as an eclipse. So I just think it's super cool. So I wanted to talk to Adam because he is easily the most learned person I know in the astrological realm, and he did not disappoint. As with anything astrology, still at this point, I'm below novice. Whatever below novice is, that's where I'm at. So a lot of this stuff goes over my head, but I enjoy looking it up afterwards. He sent me my chart when we did the first podcast, and really just without fail, we touch on some really cool stuff. Now, here's a warning for people who are watching Game of Thrones. There are spoilers up through season 6, episode 5. So if you're gonna watch it, or you want to, and we say spoiler alert, it's not like we're just going to spring it on you, and I'm not going to bring it up in this intro, but we definitely give spoilers away. They're not major, and like if you somehow manage to not find out anything major plot line related to Game of Thrones by now, you probably don't give a shit, or you're just planning to watch it so far in the future it doesn't matter. So that goes on. So yeah, if you're watching the show though, you may want to move past that. You'll have ample time to go past this. We don't dwell on it for that long. However, there are some very interesting parallels between Game of Thrones, our current political situation globally and nationally in the United States, and this eclipse, and some of the astrological significance of even a one Donald J. Trump. So there's some really cool stuff going on in this episode. We also really, really go deep with the archetypal astrology. And these are things, let me say this, and this is hopefully not too highfalutin of a thing to say, but a lot of this stuff when you're talking about astrology, the unconscious, archetypes, these are typically below our threshold of consciousness. Like we're not aware of these things as acutely as we even may like to think we are. So some of this stuff may just go right into you and you'd be like, I don't know what they're talking about, or yeah, that's interesting. But I guarantee you this stuff is working underneath it all. And we're not trying to evoke any particular thing here, but I've mentioned this on the podcast before. I've alluded to it with several guests and when I'm a guest on other shows. If you go poking around with the unconscious, it will rear its head. Not ugly head. I didn't use that word. It'll rear its head. So whatever you have going on beneath the surface, it's a good idea to get it out, but you want to be aware that you're doing it and also, mindfully engage with it. We talk a lot about dragons and dragon holes in this episode. You'll hear specifically what that means, but remember, befriend your dragons. You don't have to slay them. You don't have to kill them. You want to be aware of them, that they're dangerous too, and you want to befriend them. That's the correct approach in our estimation. So that's it for this episode. Reminder, MindPod Network live event, Wellbeing in the Modern Age, September 21st, 6 to 10 p.m., New York City. Go to witmalive.com, WITMALIVE.com. If you want to find out more, there's a lot of information there. You can also find out more information on the Instagram page, which is being run by the wonderful Julia, who is in New Hampshire now. Hope you're loving it, Julia. So that's it. We're going to get right to this episode. We're a little early this week. I know. Enjoy the eclipse, or if you had it already, that was pretty cool, right? And there's reverberations with these things too, right? We talk about that a little bit before and after. Time. We need a time episode. I keep saying in like almost every episode with guests, like, oh, we can get into how time isn't a real thing and just kind of not covering it. I promise, maybe a Patreon thing. Maybe I'll do a conversation with a few people on time. I'm trying to think of things we can do for Patreon that would be cool for people contributing. One thing is maybe doing like a topical based conversation series. So I'll ask a bunch of fan favorites of synchronicity, some guests, some questions related to a specific topic. Maybe we'll start with time and then I'll stitch it together and put a little thing together. How about that? Gonna do that. So patreon.com/synchronicity. If you want to crowd sponsor the show, that's how you do it. I'm moving through this stuff. Bing, bang, boom. All right. Without further ado, here is... Whoa, almost stumbled on that last part. Here is Adam Sommer. Thanks for doing this again, man.
Of course.
It's really...
fun.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm sure you have been looking at, but I've been really thinking about astrology over the past, I don't know, since our last conversation, a little bit before that, I think I mentioned. And I listened to an audiobook on tape that was Robert Anton Wilson's Cosmic Trigger. And I had never...
Okay.
Are you familiar with it?
Yeah, I've tried to read it. It's too smart for me.
I listened on audiobook because it's pretty bugged out too. And like there's clearly some stuff, written back in the 70s, like that just doesn't make sense now. And it's like, nope, you're wrong about that. But there's a huge section on it where he's talking about Sirius and the dog planet, and
cool.
all of these really interesting synchronistic things. And since then, which was like right around my birthday in mid-July, I've been just like tuning into the sky pretty much like daily, every night, and using that app, the Starwalk app, to see what's out there. But I know we're getting ready for this eclipse, and that's kind of what prompted me to reach out this time. I would love to hear kind of like where we are now in terms of astrology, what this eclipse potentially, means, and all these other things, and just kind of generally like hear what's been going on with you and get your take on this stuff, man.
All right. Are you recording already?
I'm totally recording.
Oh, okay. Hello, recording. I didn't know you pressed for the red button.
So every time I do a call, it records right from the beginning, and then I edit out stuff.
Okay, so we've technically begun then.
We've begun. You're in the middle of it. People are listening.
Okay. So yeah, your reference to Raw, is that what people call him? Or Anton Wilson, the Raw, the Jaws, John Anthony West. But anyhow, yeah, what's going on? You want to talk about the eclipse? Oh Noah, what are you doing to me? It's been like I have done a class on it, I've done a podcast on it, and I actually did a wonderful talk in Denver last Saturday on it. And I already felt like before the first of those of my list that I just wasn't that inspired to contribute to the conversation because
Mm.
there's just so much. But of course, it is a big deal, and there is some, we'll say, interesting angles that we could take
Yeah.
into it. And
I like
one,
I like interesting angles.
one that I'm excited about, that I don't think I'm going to be able to witness because I'm not going to the exactness of the path.
Right.
But we can get to that. I learned something about these anomalies called shadow bands, or AKA shadow snakes.
What are those?
Yeah, exactly. That happen just after the exactness of a total solar eclipse. So basically, when the sun begins to show again, and it's just like a crescent of the solar energy that begins to appear, there's this 2 to 3 minute period that, if it's clear skies, you'll see thousands of these little squiggly shadows
Oh.
on the ground that look like snakes. And there's even, reports of previous total solar eclipses of dogs like running after them and children trying to get them and pick them up and whatnot. And I find this so interesting just for the symbology
Right.
of it, because we'll just get straight into the scary territory, or the territory that a lot of people want to avoid. But it's very real context to create when you're wondering about eclipses, that they are slightly ominous.
Yeah.
And that makes sense quite literally. I mean, you have reversal from day to night, and there's this feeling of like, oh no, the gods are angry.
But I know that's what I keep thinking, that people intuitively, whether they think they've transcended that mindset or not, but right underneath the surface, like clearly your world, subconsciously, you're going to feel like everything is going to shit. Like everything is changing. It's insane. Yeah.
And it really frustrates me because, I mean, I think we covered this last time we talked, Noah, of just how science is the big muscle when it comes to the realm of truth and understanding. And there's just, I watched this TED talk of this very enthusiastic eclipse chaser, and it almost gave me FOMO for the fact that I'm not going to the path, because he was just so in love with eclipses, but also a godless man that was an atheist and was literally poking fun and being silly around the fact that once upon a time, and it's not even a once upon a time, there's still cultures and people all over the world that believe that there is a dragon consuming the sun and the moon, like Rahu Ketu in India, or depending on the culture, like jaguars in Africa, like attacking the sun and the moon, and all of these different ideas. And every year I give myself an allowance to do a little bit of a deeper dive into cultural history and just trying to understand different perspectives on eclipses. And every time, I've been doing this for 10 years, I learn something new, but also it's the same old story, that the only perspective that I can find that is without that deep reverence and care in relation to them is the Western scientific mind.
Right. The reductive materialist. We know physically what's going on with the celestial bodies, so we can explain exactly what's going on. Those foolish people before have no idea what's going on, which even, and I know what you're saying. And I always think there's a bridge between these two things, the modern scientific viewpoint and the, much more esoteric, beneath the surface viewpoints. I think there always is a bridge, but I know exactly what you're talking about. We predominantly live in a society that's been built on the backbone of this kind of materialistic scientific paradigm, which isn't to say there aren't uses for it. Like, we live in 3D reality and it's certainly helped us. But even if you just look at the symbolic aspect of an eclipse, right? The shadow aspect, blotting out the solar aspect, just in terms of what that would mean for something like individuation or, your own consciousness. I mean, there's tremendous stuff to be gleaned from there. I mean, I know, like, literally right before this call, I told you I was stuffing my face, but I was also looking, I took 2-3 minutes to look at the news. And because what's more fun to do to get your mind right before looking at the news, and I saw, Donald Trump reaffirming. By the time this come out, we'll be on to something else. So I've he'll have blown something up by that point. Hopefully not.
Yeah.
But I mean, he truthfully, reavowed his statements that he felt that these marches in Charlottesville, that, the alt left, as he called it, was equally as responsible, which is this is literally Nazis versus people who don't like Nazis. You know what I mean? It's not like some other
Right.
thing. So this makes me think of where we are culturally, in society, cosmically, cosmologically. It's a very interesting time. And, I don't know, but for me, intuitively, I'm hoping this can be a symbolic kind of point where we say, listen, shit can get really dark, but it can also start to get light again as it moves away. But that forces us to deal with what's happening with the darkness. You know what I mean?
I do. That's
Yeah.
a great way of contextualizing it, because it makes you appreciate the light a little bit more.
Yeah.
Or this idea of, I don't know, just the context of the fact that we're zooming through space and there's these two lights in the sky that seemingly are the same size from our perspective, and they just somehow, some way, at least 4 times a year eclipse each other. Like, not always total, but there's at least 4 eclipses a year, sometimes 7.
Yeah.
And these totalities are different, and so they're in a way more special. I am not under the belief, or I'll say observation, that total solar eclipses and also where they happen affect people more. I've never observed that. I think that partial, in the study of astrology, even partial lunar eclipses or partial solar eclipses, they still have validity because of the way that you basically read it in an astrology chart, because an eclipse cannot be created, can't happen without the proximity to the nodes of the moon, which is a dragon.
Right.
According to the Indians, it's Rahu Ketu.
Right.
And so it's a new or a full moon in close proximity to these nodes. And so that standalone, whether you can see it in the sky or not, is saturated with deep story.
Right. Right. I mean, I guess there's kind of like the zeitgeist, the awe that a total eclipse could do. And I also just think that it's somewhat interesting that it is passing over the continental United States. Like I think my mom is going down to South Carolina to be in the path of it. I just keep thinking about all the poor people if it's cloudy.
I know.
I know. I pray for them that it's not, because you should be able to see that. But yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, though, that it is over the continental United States.
Absolutely.
As we're going through what is clearly, I mean, we spoke about this a little bit last time, but I mean, even it wasn't that long ago that we spoke, Adam. But since then, reality seems to have fractured more and more into a discombobulated kind of not orderless chaos, but it's getting pretty chaotic. And I mean that we're talking about from a personal standpoint and collective. And I wonder, what lessons or insights are able to be gleaned that we can look at, to how to navigate this. That's really what I think it's going. How do we navigate what the fuck is going on? It's yeah.
Well, I'll illuminate some of the most important points around this eclipse, and then we can work with those images and archetypes, which you'll be able to help with too, because I'll translate. So, for example, this eclipse, for everyone listening in the future, happened, and it has yet to happen, as you and I are talking, on August 21st of 2017. And it's at 28 degrees of Leo. There's a couple things that are really important about that. That the 12 degrees of the zodiac can also be divided into 36 when you think of them in decans. So 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30. And every sign, they're called decans. And it's a really amazing way of seeing deeper into the nature of the zodiac, but also the Egyptians and a lot of, I'm not an expert on this, but a lot of the ancient cultures, actually, their calendars were based off of the decans. So we're talking about 36 weeks and 10 days in length for each of them. And so when you do this, you realize that there's a different quality to the first 10, second 10, and third 10 degrees of every sign. And when we think about that with Leo, a good buddy of mine that's recently, he was on the podcast, I think it's the one that's most recent, Austin Coppock wrote a book on these decans. And I refer it every single time I mention it because it's so well written, and it also employs magic
Cool.
into working with the decans. And he calls, in his own words, the third decan the banner. And so it's a picture at the beginning of the chapter in his book, 36 Faces, of a banner with a lion on it. And this too is getting played out, but I'll mention it anyways. That, of course, that banner is the banner of the Lannisters. If you're a Game of Thrones
It's funny. I mean, I knew that's what you were going to say. I knew it.
Yeah. We thought we were all unique in the podcast, having brought it up, and then
It's really funny.
people aren't relating it to the decan necessarily. They're relating it to what I'm going to say next,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is the star Regulus, which is the heart of the lion.
Oh, dude, I was just looking. That's a really bright star, right?
Yeah, and it's right on the ecliptic. It's
I was
very
just
good
looking at
friends
it.
with the sun. That's fascinating,
Dude,
yeah.
I was out the other night and I was like, what is that star? And I held up the Star Walk thing and I was like, Regulus. Okay.
I don't think so.
You sure?
By the way. Well, what we're dealing with here, my friend, is the sun aligning with Regulus. So if the sun is right by Regulus,
it wouldn't have been at night. This was like a week and a half ago. So no, that wouldn't have been possible.
it could. Was it flashing like a strobe
Yes.
light in the sky?
Yes.
Yeah, that's Sirius.
Okay. There you go. Sirius. Okay.
Yeah, you brought it up already.
There you
The
go.
dog star.
Yeah.
No. So basically, the sun and Regulus are really close to each other. And actually, when you use your app that you mentioned, I use Sky Guide, you use Star Walk.
Yeah.
You can pull it to the time. So I think it's 11:44 a.m. here in Colorado on the 21st of the exactness, and you'll see the eclipse on the ecliptic right on Regulus.
Cool.
So the heart of the lion, and that's a really important star. It's a royal star. There was 4 royal stars of Persia. It was one of them. The Sphinx was built at a time when it stared at it when it rose on the vernal equinox, and so that helps to date a lot of those structures, according to Graham Hancock and John
cool.
Anthony West and those people. But the nature of the star is really important, and also bringing in this decan because it's one that relates to thrones, kings, queens, and the ascent to power. All right. Now, there's a really interesting quality to stars. I don't use them a lot in my work, but there's a few of them. Like I just have the degrees of the tropical zodiac memorized, Sirius being one of them.
You're right.
And if you think about a star, I mean, a lot of them, like Regulus is actually 4 stars.
Oh,
so it's
really?
not just one. Yeah, I think it's 4. And then Sirius, there's A and B. Like there's 2 of them. It's a binary star system. I don't know if Regulus is like a quad star system. I think it's just the way it lines up as far as our perspective from Earth and looking at it. But just think of the nature of a star, right? We got one, the sun, but a lot of these stars out there they dwarf our sun. I mean, they're massive balls of energy out there in space. And so there's this idea, and I can't quote ancient wizards. I'm not so good at it, but we'll just say we'll say Valens or Ptolemy, one of these old guys from back in the day. There's this idea, and you actually will encounter it too. If you have a book on fixed stars or you go online, there's a few websites. One of them is called Constellation of Words, I think. And you read about these fixed stars, and it's so negative. Like there's so many negative qualities to almost every star that I've ever learned about. And then you start to wonder, like, why? Because it's not like that with a lot of the planets and stuff like this. Like, but you start to see it with the stars, and it's this idea that we humans don't have the capacity, for the most part, usually, to allow that star power, we'll see it like that, or that light, to, in a healthy and integrated manner, live inside of us. But, for example, we can watch it, like with the case with Regulus, come alive and shoot us into a particular direction if it's Regulus, like this idea of being enthroned in whatever your occupation is or your interest in life. So take the Red King, for example, Donald Trump, whose ascendant is on Regulus. So this eclipse happens on his ascendant in Mars. So it's very specific to him. But what we see is like there can be that like ascent to prominence to in whatever it is that you do, but these stars seem to have very, very interesting trap doors, and almost like spirits with hooks on the side of the stage, ready to just yank you off. Like the moment that you fall into the negative quality of that energy, which with Regulus is vengeance.
Right.
in revenge. Like it's the wickedness that comes over a person in power, like Cersei Lannister, for example.
Right.
And I wanted to say that too, because I mentioned this on my podcast, but it's just remarkable that in Austen's book, The 36 Faces, when he's pulling from old resources, like there's this old Indian text called the Yavanaka Jataka, if I pronounced that right.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's Indian text that's talking about Greek astrology, as far as I understand it, and I
Cool.
do believe it's from like the 4th century AD.
Cool.
Look at me trying to pretend to be a historian.
You're a scholar, Adam.
Oh my God! So it reads something like this: a woman sitting upon an ivory throne, contemplating the demise of her enemies. Is an image from this text, and it's like, are you kidding me? Like,
Right.
it couldn't get more specific than where millions and millions of people's their minds are when it relates to that damn show, but
Right.
also the political show.
Right.
It's not a she, it's a he, but still, the archetypal symbol is present.
So tell me when, based on all this stuff, Donald Trump is done. That's what I want to know, Adam. Tell me.
Well, first of all, for our listeners, we have been exploring some of the darker territories, which I think is really important.
Yeah, totally.
With eclipses, because also, and we'll get to that, I am not pessimistic about eclipses, especially this one. I think that we're already experiencing it too, because it's a space between two eclipses that is called eclipse season. I call it a dragon hole, and you begin to feel it, and we'll get to that. I think it's a very real felt experience.
It is.
So what has Trump done? I mean, the symbology, if we work with it, if there's a total solar eclipse going from coast to coast in his nation, and it happens on his ascendant, which literally is his face, we can conjure up images of Khaleesi on the back of one of her dragons swooping in and just doing what it needs to do.
Yeah, but what if he shoots it and then the Night King gets it and it turns undead? Then what?
Oh my God, Trump as part of the Night's Watch, or not the Night's Watch, but the White Walkers.
Oh man, I mean, I obviously asked, relatively facetiously, but I'm really glad you mentioned up the eclipse season. I think I just used the term "mentioned up." I don't think that's a phrase, but I'm going to go with it. It is now. But you did mention it, and I always think. I mean, I have a very interesting relationship with time. I don't typically always perceive it as linear as, I'm not saying I'm going backwards and jumping around, but I definitely think it's much more malleable than we tend to think of it. But I certainly think that this stuff reverberates before, during, and after. And it certainly seems like that's what's happening. And I find it somewhat comforting to know that there is kind of like an energetic, almost visible, not with the eye or anything, but seeing that these kind of like shock waves happen before, during, and after. I mean, pick your poison here: North Korea, Charlottesville, any of these things for this country. Right. It's pretty clear that stuff is kind of like rumbling around. I definitely want to hear more about the eclipse season.
Yeah, eclipse seasons. Again, I call them dragon holes.
Why dragon holes?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked. Well, the symbology, because I study Vedic astrology as well, and the nodes that create the eclipses have a name in India called Rahu Ketu, and it is an Ashura. It's like a demon spirit that is basically a dragon. I mean, it's described as a serpent. It's described as a lot of different things, but it's the sky serpent that consumes the sun and the moon because it's eternally vengeful to the two of them for what it did at the cosmic tea party at the beginning of all time.
It's fucked up.
So it was an intellectual concept first, but then I had direct interactions with it. Like, one was a medicine ceremony during a solar eclipse, and then I've had dreams of it, and then it just kind of keeps showing up. And so for the past 5-6 years, ever since I had my initial meet and greet with the dragons, I there's no way I could just slough it off and be like, oh, it's just my imagination. Like, it's too deep, too ancient. And my experience was too real for it to just be like, oh yeah, that was just my mind making it up.
Oh,
Fuck
those things where they won't. And so you must just be laughing hilariously as Game of Thrones progresses, and this
Oh
stuff kind of
yes.
lines up synchronistically.
Yes. No, I think it's really fascinating. If we really did enter this territory, Noah. I didn't think we would. But it's fun. I mean, I think it's fun for a lot of people who do watch the show and are interested, say, in what's going on, and can we stitch together archetypal semblance between a fictional reality and a show
Well,
with what's actually happening?
Yeah, and
Yes,
I mean,
we can.
of course we can. And I'll tell you another thing that popped in my head as you were saying that is I remember Lost. I was not a huge Lost fan as it was on. I binge watched it right towards the end and caught up with the last season. But I remember it was a show. I bring it up because it was another show that captured the attentions of millions of people in popular culture, but also had a lot of esoteric symbolism in it, like packed with it throughout the entire show.
Sure.
You know, there is good seasons, good episodes, and terrible ones, especially when the writers went on strike. But the reason I bring it up is I remember specifically right around this time, I started having some very crazy synchronistic events. Like I remember I've never been handed on the street, let alone in New York, any type of stone or rock ever. But in the span of 2 weeks, I got a white stone and a black stone right as the season finale was happening, or the series finale, which really have to do with this balance of white. And I'm like, you know, it's exactly like you're saying, these dragon hole things. It's like, what the fuck is going on? Like people randomly handed me these things. And I bring it up because like this stuff, whether we believe it or not, or subscribe to this theory, the art and the culture that we create around this stuff, when I say this stuff, that's actually what's guiding us. So these are expressions of what's actually going on. And when you have mass consciousness tuning into a show like Game of Thrones or Lost or whatever it is, that naturally expresses itself. That's an expression of what these archetypal symbols are representing. So like, even if you haven't seen Game of Thrones or Lost, still, you know, contextually, this stuff is incredibly important and also fascinating to me, just because, you know, this is the stuff that really drives us. And you know, we laugh and say, oh, with these dragon holes and, you know, there's dragons now. Look at that synchronicity. But it's of course it's there. You're keyed in and having dreams about this stuff too. So yeah, man, I'm super excited to go here.
Point well made. Yeah, you were given a black stone. A white. I was given a dragon egg, and it just hatched this morning. Actually, I don't know. I will see what happens. But where I was going with this is, so are you caught up? Did you watch the latest?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So spoiler alert.
Spoilers, Game of Thrones fans, if you have not seen through episode 5, I think it was Eastwatch or something.
Eastwatch.
Yeah.
Eastwatch.
Yes. Do not listen for the next however many minutes. Pop back in like 15.
Yeah. So there's 2 moments that I think relate very specifically to Jon Snow, who obviously is the hero.
Yeah.
Like the meta hero of the entire show, right? And the whole arc of his story is that of the comeback kid.
Yep.
Right? And I have a really close friend actually down in Austin, and he has a song called The Comeback Kid, and it came on like to my shuffle. I always listen on shuffle on my Spotify playlist.
Because you know what's up. You know how that works. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was leaving my talk on Saturday, which was a really big deal for me, it was this astrologer who has another popular astrology podcast called Chris Brennan invited me to talk about these eclipses at his astrology meetup group.
Cool.
It was amazing. And I was very nervous going into it because we come from different worlds. He is the historian. He just wrote an 800-page book on the history of Hellenistic astrology. Like this kid is very, very smart when it comes down to astrology. And so I was like there to present in front of like his group, which ended up to be huge. It was a ton of people that showed up at this thing. And I'm like, oh Lord, this is my dragon. Like, this is definitely my dragon. And anyway, it went well. It was like a flow state for me. I don't remember anything.
That's awesome. Those are the best.
Feedback was good, all that kind of stuff. My point, though, is when I got in my car and put on shuffle, the first song that came on was my buddy Luke Redfield's song, The Comeback Kid. And it gave me goosebumps and like made me tear up a little bit.
Yeah, of course.
I was like, that's so interesting. Like, and I don't need to get into my own journey with astrology and like what that particular event might have meant for me. But that song comes on, and then after it got done, a really good friend of mine calls and was just checking in to see how it went. And as I caught him up with it, all that stuff. He was super excited. And then, like, we both started sharing stories throughout our past that are similar. Like stories, like events that we go through that we feel victorious. We feel like we gained honor. We feel like something miraculous kind of just happened, right? And we started sharing these stories. And after we both shared our stories, it dawned upon us. He knows astrology too. That's the essence of this dragon hole.
Mm-hmm.
That's the essence of it. And so what do I mean? Like this idea of the comeback kid, but also what it means to rise to our own kind of throne and prominence and to be kin with the kingdom that we create, not to just be a king and rule over it like some fucked up, like, Red King situation, but to actually be one with all of our creations, all of our colleagues, anyone who might, be considered enemy or frenemy or whatever it is, but to be in that heart space. Because when you're contemplating an eclipse that happens on Regulus, it points directly into the heart. The sun physiologically is the heart. Regulus is the heart of the lion. So pride cometh before the fall is an idea that we shall avoid.
Right.
When thinking about these types of things. And so this energy of the comeback kid, this energy of Jon Snow and who he's become in the show. And then in the last episode, I mean, I was screaming when it happened. I was like, that is exactly what I have been talking about, of what it means to face the dragon.
When he touches the dragon, you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, it was so fucking cool.
He faces the dragon, but also wins the heart of Mother of Dragons.
Of course.
And so you have both in all of the greatest stories ever told. And what are we doing? But we are in a story too.
That's right.
Right? We are in our own story, and everyone has a dragon because everyone has the north node of the moon somewhere in their own natal chart. That's our dragon. And I love the way Joseph Campbell talks about the dragon.
Yeah, you're just plucking, or I'm plucking
out
of your head. Yeah, you beat me to it. Go, continue. You're on a roll.
So my understanding of old Joe's take on it is that the dragon or the monster forms around the initial wounds of innocence of our inner child. And so I think that we gravitate naturally in the first, we'll say 7 years of our lives, if everything is going well, to it. Like we just become it. But then there's a series of circumstances, traumas even, that can happen that begin to, in a way, this shitty experience is put the dragon poop around us like armor, and this shitty experience, and then put it on there, and then put it on there. And all of a sudden, we're just caked in this shitty mud that is protecting us from our heart, and it gets crusted over. And I think the whole job is to, either employ a dragon that we befriend to blast it off of us or to chisel away.
Right.
Just and get back to this idea of, oh, that is what I am meant to face and become. Because what we fear, that dragon, is protecting the greatest treasure that we could possibly even imagine in our lives. And it is that feeling of victory.
Right.
It's like, I've discovered it. I've done this. And everybody has a dragon. Everyone has this in them. And my final point with this is that when we're talking about eclipses, Noah, it's the nodes, the dragon, Rahu Ketu, moving around the chart, and then when the new moon happens in close proximity to it, that is when a solar eclipse happens. And so what are they then? What are like in a phrase, what are eclipses in a psychological context or mythical or within our story?
Right.
But course correcting events. They are the unexpected. And we can have a hunch about like what they might represent symbolically when you look at a chart and see where it falls in a person's chart. Like for you, for example, it's in your career house, the 10th. And so it's these unexpected events that aren't inherently good or bad. They are meant to get us on the right path. As long as we are willing to change with it, as long as we are willing to face the dragon and not slay it, that's wasteful behavior, to befriend it,
right,
and learn about it and then there we go. We see how things open up here a little bit. And so what were you going to say about old Joe?
Well, no, I was gonna say that's the whole hero's journey. That's the whole thing. That's what you're facing. That's what's to be conquered, and not conquered in a way like you're saying, like we're gonna kill it and then we're gonna stand on it and cheer that we've, overtaken it. But I love, like, that's what we were talking about in the Game of Thrones episode. He puts his hand on the dragon. I mean, which points to some whole lineage for him that we won't get into, but it obviously, like, there was an incredibly symbolic moment of facing the dragon, right? But it was a different way. It wasn't like slashing at it. He was accepting it, and it was accepting him. And that then united, like you're saying, the archetype of the mother of the of dragons and Jon Snow, this Jesus-like figure who literally has died and come back. I mean, it's very, very powerful stuff. And it's fascinating that you said it's in my career, the 10th house, because that's been the story of my life for the past year and a half. And I was sitting pretty comfortable in the career house for a really long time before that, relatively speaking. And it certainly feels like that's my dragon. Like, I don't know, like, if everyone can intuitively tune in to what their particular dragon is at this point in their lives, but I certainly am acutely aware of when it's happening with me. It's not like let me think about what my dragon is here. Let me try to figure that out. And I mean, like you said, this is an opportunity to kind of befriend and use this heart mind we have to actually embrace and kind of integrate all of this stuff, face it and use it, not just face it to dominate or rule. And that's the broader archetypal, I think, kind of symbology of this moment. But yeah, I mean, I juxtapose all of this stuff with I do wish, now there are Nazis in Charlottesville, not to bring it back to the mundane world too heavily, although I am, but I see so much reactivity in my own life with my own emotions, and then broadening out. And I always just remark at people, who are so incredibly angry at one side or the other. Like, how do you have the energy for it? Is shit not going on in your life? Like, where you're drained, like, all the time you have to deal with regular shit that actually impacts your day to day. But I really do wonder, like, it seems like we're building to like a fever pitch here. And I wonder at what point do we collectively kind of reduce the pressure? Or is this kind of the job of people who see these things going on to work from the inside out and get people to start latching onto these concepts like forgiveness and compassion? How do we get there the best way? I mean, that's a broad question. I don't expect you to have an answer for it, but it's something I think about whenever this stuff comes about, this acutely, I guess.
Well, there's ways of getting ideas, or at least hunches, about like what is the specific thing collectively, not to pretend that I have an answer for 7 billion people on the planet. I work with individuals mainly. But when we're talking about eclipses, one of the most fascinating ways of studying the nature of them, because they are in a way a little unpredictable. For the longest time, before I was familiar with the Saros series, which is basically a family of eclipses, and I'll get into that, I wasn't aware of it. And so, like, when I would study eclipses and I would experience them, they would all have a similar feel to them that did feel kind of eventful, slightly ominous, kind of like New Year's Eve. But like the themes, like specifically that would show up, were not in any way predictable. They were always surprising to me. Yeah. And then this idea of the Saros cycles or series came to me. And there's this wonderful book that Bernadette Brady wrote on it called The Eagle and the Lark. And still a noob in trying to understand these, but the basic idea is that all eclipses begin on either the North or the South Pole. And then slowly over time, every 18 years and 11 days, the next eclipse will happen in that cycle. And so they move from pole to pole over a period on average of 1,300 years. As they get closer to the equator, the exactness of the eclipses get greater. And so this particular family, the eclipse that's happening on August 21st, is called 1 North, according to her, and it began in 1639. And so her technique is you look at the chart for the origin of the eclipse, and you study it like a birth chart.
Right.
And then you have the qualities of this eclipse family. And so every single time that it comes around, every 18 years or so, it's a continuation of that story.
Mm.
Now, one of the eclipses that happened during this Saros family was in July of 1945. Now, you can be a historian. Why was July of 1945 significant?
I don't know. Maybe something related to war, perhaps.
Yeah.
That's
very significant relating to war.
Yeah. So symbolically, looking at something like the end of a war, right? A world war, right? The biggest war to date that had ever been seen. That was the last eclipse that in this series that was like this?
It wasn't the last in this series. There was one in 99. There was one in, I think, 81. And then you just go back in 18-year increments. And it changes by 10 days or 10 degrees every 18 years. So, for example, the last one was in early August of 99. And so it was in Leo, but it was 10 degrees different than this one is.
I see.
Yeah. So the nature, I'm not going to like talk about the chart. If anyone wants to cast it, I believe it's January 4th or 5th of 1639. And you'll be able to pull it up, and it's at 13 Capricorn. That is the beginning of the Saros cycle. And I'll just tell you what my take on it. Hers is basically unexpected turns of events with friends and or groups that have a long-lasting effect in one's life, is like the synopsis that I can remember from her book. My interpretation of it, especially with this eclipse, is that communication is the only way.
Yeah.
You bring the pride, or the whole idea of the pride before the fall, and that gets in the way from true communication, not even on the political scale, but being able to go into those places that just are not comfortable. Like being able to talk about something that's nearly impossible to even talk about, or to like the two words that are just the most healing in any language is I forgive.
Right.
These ideas, I think, really are quite clear when you look at this chart. And throughout the Dragon Hole, throughout this eclipse season, I have been witnessing it in my own life very clearly.
Yeah.
With a couple people, I'm just like, all right, you don't want to communicate? You're not able to go there. I've given you the opportunity 3 times.
Right.
I guess we're done.
Right.
That sucks. That's sad, but I've done all I can do. And, well, we move forward.
Yeah.
And you think about that, and if that is a theme within these eclipses, well, you go back to July of 45, and there's no better way to cut off communication with people than to drop a nuclear bomb.
It's pretty clear message. Yeah. You don't want to talk anymore.
Yeah. And here we are again.
Yeah.
It's a nuclear thing. And so I think, when did the Cold War technically end? It was the early 80s, right?
Yeah. Was it the early 80s? Yeah, I guess.
Or did it ever end?
Well, I don't know that they declare. Did they ever declare that it was over? I mean, Reagan, right? Yeah. Was it over with Reagan and then the beginning of Bush or Carter, rather? I mean, was it going on with Carter? I don't think so.
I'm not that great.
Neither am I. I'm totally not at all. I'm speaking out of my ass, but I don't remember. I mean, at least I remember growing up as a kid. I was born in 83. So when I was like aware of stuff, I don't think we were in the Cold War anymore. Like it was that we had long since, it was the Soviet Union, and it was a totally different thing. Yeah. I don't know, but it was in the 90s, in the 80s, I believe.
Yeah. And so by looking back, and this is a study that like I'm not necessarily wired to do, but it's something that I'm always pulled into. And so I always mention this on my podcast and now on yours. It's like, if people are into the mundane element of astrology or history, I mean, Cosmos and Psyche is definitely your book by Richard Tarnas. That'll get you started. But like, you can do your own research and studies by going backwards in time in these Saros series and seeing the link between all of the eclipses that happen. And it's a little tougher in our own lives, which is where my interest lies.
Right.
Psychologically, mythically, and helping people and building greater context for my own life. And so you and I burned 2 months apart. So we've only experienced one, and that was the one in 1999
Right.
within this family. And when I went back to that, like it kind of blew my mind. I was like, that was a theme for me in August of 1999. It was a huge deal, like a falling out with a friend that was really traumatic for me. And so like that can't be, like, when the logic gets applied, like universally true for everybody. But maybe for those that are sensitive to it, or if it falls in really specific parts of our chart, maybe there is an element of truth to that. And so can you think back to August of 1999 and kind of think about falling outs with friends and or groups?
Well, I can tell you that 99, I would have been 16. So I would have just done LSD for the first time within 6 months of that. And that was certainly a radically shifting. I mean, I'd have to go specifically back, but it could be that that's when I met my first like long-term girlfriend at Berkeley when I did acid for the first time, because it was a summer 5-week program. It was in between sophomore and junior. That was like one of the most insane periods of my entire life, like without a doubt. Like that was a completely directionally and life-changing period that summer. I mean, if I went back, I'd be curious to see if it was in that August, because no, that was like, I mean, that's like a benchmark for me. That's like, I can look at that and be like, oh yeah, shit changed then, like big time. Yeah, man, that's fascinating.
Now think about it in context to your own chart. We already brought it up again, but to remind you that, and I'll bring in a new element as well, that eclipse was also in Leo, same family, but also in Leo. So it happened in your career house. Now at 16, you're not exactly in a career, but if you're being a good boy, you're dreaming up your college and your career and stuff like that. Like that's definitely not where my mind was at 16. But like there's this idea of like, what is my public function? Like what is it that I'm really into? Like what do I want to learn? What do I want to focus on?
Yeah, music. It was music. That's when I really started, and that's because I was at a 5-week. And I went to Berkeley, which is my alma mater. I eventually went there, but I went for this 5-week program, took acid for the first time, which was an 18-hour trip of just totally mind-bending. Just, oh my God, changed my life forever. But I realized that I wanted to go to a music college. And this is 2 years before I went to college, but that clearly planted the seed. I eventually ended up going there. And that's been this. I also started making music around then. Then, which is still inexorably linked to every single thing that I do. No, that is another fascinating thing, and it's spot on.
Yeah. Now check this out. This is the new element that I wanted to bring into it, which relates to the dragon, your dragon specifically. All right. So like when you look at the chart, I've sent you it before, right?
Yes.
Because I casted it last time, so you have it.
I have it.
So if you're looking at your chart, you'll see that in that 10th house, right next to something that's called the MC or the midheaven, the angle that relates to this public function, you'll find this little character named Mercury.
Yeah.
There. All right. So you have Mercury conjunct the MC, which means that planetary archetype, which relates to music in some sense. Venus is more specific to music, but you'll see what I mean, how that helps to crack the code a little bit. Yeah. Mercury is the lord or the ruler of your dragon. So language, the astrology language is composed of rulership. So your dragon, your north node is in Gemini in your natal chart.
Yeah.
Mercury rules Gemini. So wherever it is in a person's chart, it points very specifically to an area of life that, in a way, you can see how you tame the dragon. It's in this area, but also where the comeback kid and the honor and the victory, those types of feelings take place. And so you can look back and be like, oh, if the last eclipse you were at Berkeley and focusing on music, and if at this one, like I would ask, like, what is your relationship to music at the moment, and where are those fears? Where are the dragons protecting certain things from you actually accessing them?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, I have an EP, my first EP coming out of music in fall. And when I say I have an EP coming out, I've been saying I have an EP coming out. I have 3 tracks of the 4 done, but I need to go back and revisit it. And I've been lamenting the fact that I felt like I haven't had any time or energy. And this is coming from someone who just created an entire course on how to beat those types of feelings and things. Nevertheless, I've just been overwhelmed. I alluded it to at the beginning. So it feels like this constant struggle. This is my dragon. It's very clear to me, is how to pursue the things that bring me the most joy, that really I know intuitively help me, help other people, have value in the world, versus how to navigate the householder's role of having to make enough money to pay the mortgage, having enough, your responsibilities. And this is like, it could not be more crystal clear in the past 3 months, however long it's been, that this is my dragon right now. And I'm making my way towards it. I'm not getting Dracarys. I'm not getting totally burnt up. So I feel like there's progress to be made. I mean, you asked me at the beginning, like, how are you? And I'm like, yeah, I feel like I'm at the tail end of like a pretty rough transitional period. So I'm still in it, but it doesn't feel like, oh my God, they're just little aftershocks and reverberations. But yeah, man, it's acutely aware. I mean, it has dominated my psyche and life more than anything else in the past, especially 2-3 months. And that's my dragon for sure, without a doubt.
You have a deeper comprehension than most. That even though astrology, I mean, like that is deep understanding of the nature of Rahu or the North Node, because what it also can do, like what you were describing of like the occupation of attention. I think here's an interesting thing about the North Node is that there's completely different takes on what it represents, west to east. So according to a lot of Western astrologers, it relates to destiny or your future. And according to a lot of Vedic astrologers, Indian astrologers, Jyotishis, they relate it to this severed head of a dragon that's like very similar to the Buddha's hungry ghost, that it's never satiated. And so like once we discover what it is and we know how to feed it, it's very challenging to turn it off. And it then relates to like material gain, success, power, etc. And so they see it like both of the nodes as shadowy planets, like they're troublesome. And so I find myself somewhere in between because in my experience and also working with thousands of clients, it is very important to understand these stories and how to work with them, because my goodness, when you do understand your dragon, the North Node and its story, and you access it, it feels amazing. To use a term that your podcast is named after, synchronicity becomes second nature in some sense. Like everything becomes meaningful because you discovered something. You've begun to write a story that you've always wanted to write. Now, I think that's a very positive thing, but then the occupation and the feeling of turning it off, like the idea, and I'm sure you felt this before, but you like get done recording a podcast and putting it all together and getting it out there, and then all of a sudden your mind is straight to the next one. Like, all right, what's next? That's rock energy.
Yeah, I mean, and that makes a lot of fucking sense, man. It is, and it's like this. It's like a wheel that is encouraging and satisfying, but also, I do try to take a step back as much as I can and realize like contextually where I want this stuff to go. And I know a lot of other people are going through this too. And, you mentioned that a lot of these kind of shadowier elements like, pride and ego and power craving can seep in. And that's why I always try to check. I think I overcorrect sometimes for that. But I certainly am acutely aware of all of those energies being potential pitfalls. It is true. I guess, what I've been trying to deal with through all of this is recognizing that these things exist and they have some influence, but how to stay, have some semblance of equanimity throughout these. That's been my, I think my biggest lesson to learn in this, and I'm by no means there, is how to stay somewhat centered through these trials and tribulations and upheavals and positive things too. There was a Ramana Maharshi quote I saw recently that I absolutely loved, which is when you first begin to, experience the true nature of reality or yourself, first comes waves of ecstatic bliss. He's like,
Yeah.
that's not it. He's like, hold off on that. If you can get past that and move past it, comes great calm. And that's actually what it is. And I've experienced this in my own life many times. I mean, I remember the first really powerful synchronistic period of my life where everything was lining up. I mean, I was in absolute awe, like jaw-dropping awe, like where, I'm trying to tell people about it. I'm like, oh my God, this is incredible. And it was almost stifling in a certain way. And inevitably my ego tended to get involved and take control of the story and say, oh, look at you, magical person who's amazing. But the more I've come into contact with things that kind of pierce the veil, whether it's astrology giving us those kind of archetypal references that we need to get there, or just a psychedelic experience, whatever it is to appreciate and feel and experience the bliss and all of that, but recognize there's a state there that comes after that is a little bit more clear than the bliss, because it's so easy to get overwhelmed, I think. And you mentioned ebb and flows. Like, there are times where I'll yearn for those synchronistic moments. Like, I wish it was like it was back then. It was so magical, not recognizing that there's these things ebb and flow. They go and come, and to appreciate each one. And I mean, I think the eclipse is obviously a great kind of just at least symbolic from a layman's perspective. It's such a transient thing. It moves across the country this time in like 90 minutes. That's absurd. That's so fast. So I just love all of this stuff kind of packed in here. And I know like so many people like, have these different theories about what eclipses fit in and how they fit into popular culture. But I mean, digging deep with some of this stuff, man, has been super fun.
It's the way I like to think about it. And yeah, there is a lot of different ways to look at an eclipse, right? Like it's a very rich and elusive topic, and it's very frustrating in my occupation that there's not that many good books on it.
Yeah.
I really haven't. If someone's listening to this and they know of a great book suggestion on it, like, I'm always open, but like, I have most of them on the topic, and I'm very meh.
You're gonna have to write it. That means you have to write it.
I know, but like, when you get into the topic, you're like, oh my God, this is way bigger than me. This is like a nest of dragons. Actually, plural for dragons is a bonfire. I learned that from Stephen King.
Is that right? That's cool.
He's like, you have the murder of crows, or the gaggle of geese, a pride of lions, as is the season. And when you have more than one dragon, it is a bonfire.
Maybe you know this. I saw it the other day in a children's thing I was watching with Eli. Do you know what a baby goose is called? It's a really weird name. It's like a cygnus or something like that.
Oh yeah, that's the word for the constellation. Cygnus. CYGS.
Yeah. I was like,
Cygnus.
I was like, that's so weird that's what they call baby geese. But
I had no idea. I did not. I had no idea. But I know it's a constellation in the sky.
Yeah, man. Dude, before we go, I want people to know where to find you, to set up things with you, and just like dive deeper into what you're doing, because I'm sure at this point it's the second time you've been on. Like, you are a wellspring of astrological and archetypal understandings of astrology. I mean, one of my most favorite people to speak to. So like, where do people find you? What can they do to get in touch, set up something with you? Please tell me.
You're feeding the flames of my pride, Noah.
It's my job.
So there's this new idea that has come to me during this eclipse time that I really hope to do with a lot of people in the span of my career, because getting one astrology reading is wonderful. Sometimes that's all you need. But I for the longest time, I've offered this thing called the complete reading. It's 5 sessions. They're very specific on the topics. And by the end of it, people walk away with a very complete understanding of their chart and where they're at and how to get the most out of the situation. That's wonderful and all. But I want to create these eclipse readings that either are like a concentrated 2 or 3 sessions during the eclipse season or the dragon hole, or that span the year, and we can visit 2 to 4 times like throughout all the eclipses in the year, and go really deep into the nature of those eclipses, and then try to understand the context of them throughout their biography.
Awesome.
Like looking backwards. And I think, you say you should write the book. Well, the only way I'm actually going to accumulate this deep wisdom and these findings is by doing something like that.
Right.
Like, and having just thousands of chart examples of these themes and these repeating things. And so that will be available on my website soon. But if you're drawn to it, just go to holestoheavens.com and you can, peruse the site. I have writings on there. I have a podcast that I do every week. And there's also this thing like around exploring these eclipses, whether it's like in that reading context that I just brought up or just for yourself as we go into it. And it relates to understanding. And I was thinking about like parts of understanding, like the 4 parts of understanding, for example, that we need the ear to hear it. That is, we need to be open-minded enough to actually have listened this far in the podcast. We need the eye to see it. And so that means to actually go further, cast your own chart, look around about this, get a reading with a competent astrologer and explore it, like see it for yourself. We need the heart to actually feel it. And so the hearing and the seeing only gets us to the space where all of a sudden it's a felt experience.
Right.
It's like, oh my God, like this is the dragon, this is real, this is what this all represents for me. And then finally, we need the guts to continuously explore it. And so to actually do the dragon work, I know so many people that have very well-rounded understanding of astrology, but they don't face the dragon, it seems. That is by giving readings, putting themselves out there. They just keep taking classes. They just keep reading books. They just keep doing this stuff. And really, in my experience, the only way that this information animates itself or it turns into what I think is cosmonosis is by engaging the information with other human beings. So whether that's a reading or just talking to friends or going to classes and looking at people's charts and like being in it, it's the only way it fully comes alive. Self-study is like taking your own pulse. You can feel it a little bit. You can read a little bit of it, but like in acupuncture school, they say you can't get a true read on your own pulse. Like you need to have it taken by someone else. And I do think that's true with looking at your own chart, which is of course what everyone does at the beginning. Like everyone's like staring at their chart forever and trying to understand everything, but that gives a very limited, sometimes fear-based, because you're searching for problems and you're searching for,
there's a metaphor in there for human existence. Yeah. Dude, it's pretty good. Dude, holestoheavens.com. I'm going to have all the links. And dude, thank you so much for doing this. I know we both have busy days. I'm glad we got to do this. You're the best.
Thank you so much, Noah. You're amazing.
All right, let's catch up soon.
All right.
All right, man. Peace.
Later. All right.
Cool, man. I'm going to let you go. I know you need to get ready. That was awesome. You're the best. I want to catch up soon. I do want to do something semi-regular. And I also I want to start funneling people to you because I think the more people you're talking to just in life, that's going to be better. So let's figure out some cool ways to get some shit going.
Yep.
Yeah, man.
Yep. I talked to Brandon, by the way. I don't know if you knew that, but I'm going to be on his podcast, I think, tomorrow.
That is going to give you a big old bump. It really, really shot my numbers up for.
Really?
I must have gained, I think, 500 subscribers, I think, just based on the analytics.
Holy shit. Really?
Yeah. Oh, dude. It's a daily. It's Monday through Friday. Yeah. So like he's really just like, you can imagine the amount of energy you need to expend and focus to just get something out. And like he puts out really good stuff too. So he has a very engaged audience. I think the day after my episode came out, I was on my podcast shot up to like number 4 in spirituality, number 3. Like I had never seen it before. And he emailed me about it. He's like, hey, you just passed me. Like I didn't want that to happen. I was like, sorry. He's just you're going to have a blast with him. He is super, super cool.
No, I already talked to him. We did it.
Oh, you already did it. It's coming out tomorrow. Oh, dude.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You're going to see a bump.
Cool.
Yeah, he's great. Definitely. I think of anyone on MindPod Network, of all the ones I've been on and brought on, he showed me the biggest bump by far. He's definitely.
Oh, man.
Yeah, get ready. Awesome. Yeah.
I hope it went well. I think it went well.
Oh, I'm sure it did. I'm not. I have no doubts about it. All right, man. We'll talk soon.
Beautiful.
All right, buddy.
All right, ciao.
Peace. thank you for listening to that episode. If you want to find more out about Adam, go check out his website, holesteheavens.com. Go sign up for a reading with him. Or if you're an aspiring astrologer, go check him out as well. Really, really clued in. There's no bullshit here. He's not trying to sell you anything. These are valid tools that the people who choose to invest and learn of them. All right, gonna go with that. Learn about them really do can provide insight into your life. That's it, right? holesteheavens.com. Go check him out. He also has the Exploring Astrology podcast on mindpodnetwork.com. Go check it out. Big thank you, as always, to Patrick. You're the coolest. I will see you next